Um, I use higher education and universities interchangeably in this presentation. Yeah, my next slide, please. Yes, the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2022 stated that now halfway through, many countries in the world, especially in Africa, are unlikely to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030. Next, please. The reasons were quoted: the coronavirus pandemic, the war in Ukraine conflict, and climate change have all contributed to hampering this progress. And I added to that the lack of constrained donor support. Next, please. The report evaluates Africa process towards the SDGs and the objectives of the African Union's Agenda 2063. I assume people are aware of the Agenda 2060, which were produced by the AU in 2013. And when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the SDGs in 2015, it recognized Africa Agenda 2063 as a roadmap for development in Africa, but asked the African Union to incorporate parts of the SDGs which are either not incorporated in Agenda 2030 or already dealt with marginally, which has been done. And this report gives in-depth analysis of these 5 SDGs, and it calls for higher order strategic approaches for pushing forward the 2 agendas of the SDGs and Agenda 2063. So next, please. The conclusion is that African member states, especially those south of the Sahara, are not on track to meet the intended goals and targets, and some acceleration is required if we are going to achieve at least some of these targets. Next, please. We know that SDGs expanded the focus beyond primary and secondary education, unlike MDGs and education for all. And that was obviously positive, but it just puts burden on higher education. Having said that, there is general agreement that many stakeholders in Africa are still either skeptical or not really doing anything to involve higher education and to enable higher education actually as one of the enablers of change towards achieving the SDGs. Next, please. Okay. In Africa, obviously, at the time of independence or shortly before, colonial powers usually establish single university, which is traditional university based on British or colonial models, university governed mostly by scholars and which values academic freedom and so on. Africans look for higher education to improve their lives and to solve their problems, which are still there. And although university or higher education has contributed to development and provision of professionals to fill in the posts vacated by the expatriates who left after independence, generally the impact on people's lives has been marginal, and people still live with those problems. Next, please. In then the role of universities, as we view it as a driver for change, driver for achievement of goals of development, were not very clear at that time. Next, please. In the 70s, when many African countries were facing economic difficulties and juggling competing priorities and so on, there were questions were being asked about the role of universities. Are universities actually good value for money? What are they doing to solve the problems Africa still stuck with, problems of poverty and lack of good services, disease and so on? And that tempted the Association of African Universities to hold a workshop in Accra in 1972, more than 50 years ago. And that meeting produced what we call the Accra Declaration, which calls for universities in Africa to become development universities. Some people use developmental universities. And that means universities should now orient all the academic disciplines, research, and community engagement towards developmental issues. This was received well by some academics, by some politicians, like President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania at the time, and by the World Bank. However, there was a lot of skepticism and objection. A lot of people thought that deviating from the traditional university model dilutes the message of the university and dilutes the academic standards and so on. So not much progress was achieved. Next, please. Again, in that meeting in Accra, there was a call upon governments to steer universities towards contributing to development through provision of adequate funds. Now, universities governments did interfere in University of Africa at different times, but that has not always been towards actually pushing them in the direction of government. Quite often it's just to serve government's interest of political control over universities or appointment of their cronies who often lack credibility, and that led to a lot of tension and even open conflict in some universities. Next, please. In 2009, the Association of African Universities, aware that not much progress has been made, again held the General Conference in Abuja in Nigeria, and the title was Sustainable Development in Africa, the Role of Higher Education in 2009, which produced again the Abuja Declaration, which again pushed in the same direction on revision of the educational system to effectively achieve higher education for sustainable development in Africa. I was in the next slides, I will enumerate some of the objections and concerns which were produced at the time, because some of them are still being reiterated by academics in many African universities. Yes, second, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the barriers first, there was not enough funding. Again, capacity among staff members for implementing the development model as well, because the schism remains between policymakers and academics. Politicians say, are accused of ignoring what is happening in university and research, which comes out and from university. At the same time, politicians say, we go to these academics, they don't give us alternative policy choices and so on. So there was talk about how can we train academic staff so that they can really implement this developmental model. The mindset of the staff, again, all trained in the traditional institutions. And the other thing is that people fear that excessive engagement of the staff members with governments and development agencies are going to take them away from their other duties of teaching and research. Next, please. And then there was issues of career progression for individuals. The existing formal standardization requirements and qualifications framework, which had to again be changed to accommodate the requirements of the new developmental model, and the university ranking, which depends mostly on publishing good papers in high impact journals. And so many academics would like to probably want to concentrate on that rather than getting engaged into initiative with government, with development agencies, or with the communities. Next, please. Now, there was a call more than 20 years ago that issues of sustainable development should be approaching jointly with issues of climate change, because the two are interact on a number of levels, and climate change is already hitting Africa very hardly in many ways. But despite this, over the last 20 years, very little progress was made in that respect. However, more recently, next please, 3 important documents came out which actually emphasized the need for this joint approach. First one is the World Meteorological Association Climate Change Threatening Sustainable Development Goals, which state that monitoring the global climate indicators as well as their related risks and impacts is of critical importance for achieving the SDGs. The second document, next slide, please, is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United nations, which state that the confluences of crises dominated by COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts are creating spin-off impacts on food and nutrition, health, education, the environment, and peace and security, and affecting all the sustainable development goals. Climate change report is a code red for humanity impacting across the SDGs. That was a statement by the Secretary General of the United Nations. The third is a document produced by the African Union, a committee chaired by the past president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, AU Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan 2022-2023. The realization of Africa's Agenda 2063 cannot be possible without proactive collective continental efforts aimed at addressing the impacts and encumbrances of climate change, which hampers our integration and development. Our economies greatly rely on climate-sensitive sectors, which have great similarities across the continent. Next, please. There are a lot of barriers to research on sustainable development and this joint approach with climate change. One of them is complexity and uncertainty about the long-term effects of climate change. Also, the issues of complication between the different departments and the need for balancing honest, credible, cutting research with informing community. Communities need simple message which are consistent with common wisdom so that it can change into actually policies. But we know research doesn't work like that. And we know that in issues of climate change and sustainable development, quite often there are research outputs which might not be consistent with common wisdom. Next, please. Again, department communications, because issues of sustainable development are discussed and dealt with in colleges of economics and political science, sociology, so on, while climate change is basically a natural science. And then publishing and funding mechanisms continue to encourage disciplinary focus. And again, there's no clear criteria for recognizing interdisciplinary efforts. So individual academics prefer to put their effort to become expert in their own disciplines rather than getting involved into multidisciplinary groups with main interest of impacting their societies. Next, please. Then the need for shared knowledge production, different approaches, we've discussed that, and focusing on impact measures. Next, please. Politics. Climate change is a political issue. Governments are very sensitive to a lot of things related to climate change and its effects, and what governments are actually doing to mitigate this phenomenon. And this will affect the ability of research of universities and research centers to communicate their research honestly to the society. Next, please. Okay, now I just want to state that there's so much at stake for our continent and the world that it is not a question of if universities want to get involved. It's a question of how to get involved. And we cannot waste more time, actually. I lost my screen. I have my screen, but I don't know if it's available to people. So it's a must now for universities to get involved in these issues. Now, research is a driver of social and economic development, and it has been directly or indirectly. So we need to transform research and science in general to help transforming societies towards SDGs. Three qualities of research now are important. Previously, people will emphasize the rigor of research. People want to do excellent research, which is publishable, in high-impact journals. But with rigor and excellence, we need relevance now. Research needs to be salient, timely, usable, and effective. And the third criteria is legitimacy of research. Research has to be endorsed by users and other stakeholders. I want to say, despite this, there are success stories for universities in Africa which have been successful in getting involved very seriously and successfully in issues of SDGs while they continue actually to conduct their traditional role of teaching and other university traditional roles. The Times Higher Education Impact Ranking of 2023, 2 universities in Africa are included in the top 100, which are the University of Johannesburg in 46th place and University of Pretoria in 69th. 2 universities actually came first, University of Johannesburg for its contribution to SDG 1, low poverty, research on poverty and support for students from poor families, and Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Accra ranks first for its contribution to SDG 4, based on its research on contributions to early years and lifelong learning and commitment to inclusive education. Several other institutions also fared well in the work, mostly in South Africa. And those universities in South Africa are very good at actually publicizing what they're doing. A lot of literature is available. So I want to finish by saying that I think the burden on higher education institutions in Africa in particular now is great in helping their societies trying to make use of the coming few years in achieving at least some of the SDGs. Thank you very much.